Hi, my name is Pancake. I'm in 8th grade and joined the animation category of the Georgia State Tech Fair. My project is an animated sequence showing a battle between starfighters flying through a canyon. I hope you enjoy. For my project, I used 3 programs: Houdini, Maya, and After Effects. Houdini is the industry standard in simulation, Maya is the industry standard in animation, and After Effects is compositing software. In this project, I created the canyon in Houdini. Then I exported that to Maya and animated my ships. Then, bringing the ships back into Houdini, I could simulate all of the special effects. Over here is my canyon, and this is how I created the canyon through these nodes. Now Houdini works downwards as nodes, so as you go farther down, you have more manipulation. Houdini creates custom nodes for different processes. Height field nodes are used for terrain. To start the canyon, I just dropped down a basic height field node. The next thing you need is the actual height of the canyon. Canyons aren't straight like this, so you have to add some more distortion to them. For that, you can drop down height field distort nodes. So the canyon is not just a straight shot anymore, it actually has curves. Then you want to start distorting the inside of the canyon, which I did in these next few nodes. Now that we have the canyon nice and distorted, you can see it's looking a lot more realistic. Problem now is, no ground is perfectly flat. So what we need to do is add a noise over everything, which just adds a little bit of unevenness. Then what I wanted to do is take the tip tops of the canyon and create peaks. So I can mask out what I wanted, which is in the red, and then I can add the peaks through another noise. Right now you see there's no canyon floor to my canyon, it's just a bunch of rocks coming up, which is not very realistic. So what I added was a height field clip. What that does is you can set a minimum value, so if anything goes below it, it'll just clip it out, and you have a floor now. Then I converted it to polygons, and exported it to Maya. Now in Maya I can import my canyon. Then I imported my models. I found a Crest model on CG Trader, and my TIE Fighter model in the Video Copilot pack for Element 3D. To animate them, I needed a path. So all I had to do was take this Path Create tool and start drawing. It creates a path for you. Then what I can do is I can go into my animation, constraints, and motion path, and attach to motion path. Then we have the model actually moving on the motion path. You can see that here. Once you add a model to the motion path, it may be going in the right direction, but it doesn't have that correct roll like real airplanes have. So to create that, I had to use keyframe animation. Here you can see for my Crest, which is the main ship, you can see I have multiple keyframes, each one telling the computer that I want the ship on a certain curvature. Here you can really see that. So as it comes down, you can see that the ship goes from kind of leaning to the right to leaning to the left. That gives it that really realistic, fluid motion that ships have. Now I did this for every ship, but to get the TIE fighters to look like they were actually engaging the Crest, what I did was I duplicated the Crest path, and I could just change some things. So it's not perfectly behind the Crest, but when it comes down, it actually looks like it's about to attack the Crest. So let's say you are there on set and you have these ships flying through the air. Well, you're probably going to have a few different types of cameras. You're going to have one on the ground that's just rotating and following them, kind of like this camera. Then you're probably going to have some on top of the ships, kind of like these cameras. And then you're probably going to have a helicopter camera like this camera. Each one you would cut together to make an end product that looked realistic. To create these animations, I use a 3-camera setup. So the biggest one, which is kind of controlling everything, is the transform camera. It's just moving forward. Every other camera moves forward now because it's parented to that, but each other camera, all the other cameras don't have necessarily rotation and zoom. So the second camera I have is rotation, and the third one is zoom. So you can see here, I have my transform. And it's just moving forward, very basic, very boring. Once you have that, you want to go in here and you want to add your rotation. So that's getting a lot more interesting, a lot more realistic, but it's still not perfect because you don't have your zoom. Once the ships get too close, you want to zoom out. That's what you would do in real life. So once you do that, you then add your zoom. So you can see here, down here is where my keyframes are. And once it gets too close, or once I want it to zoom out, I can just keyframe it from 240, which is what I have it here. So the focal length 240 millimeters, and down here is 120. So what I started with was bringing in the TIE Fighter and taking its velocity. So you can see here I have my TIE Fighter. I have a computing velocity, so I can tell, okay, so it's going this fast, this far. Then I can take the laser guns on the ship, and then just 1 point from them. Then what I can do is I can bring that into a particle simulation called a PopNet, which is really just a particle operating system. There, I can go in and I can add some extra velocity so it will move forward. I can keyframe how many particles I want per second. So over here we can see that this is where the particle is stimulated to. You can see them start shooting out here. Then once I had these particles, I wanted to export them so I could keep the simulations light. When you export things and bring them back in this geometry, it's a lot lighter than if you have simulations still going and you're building on top of that. So once I exported, I brought it back in, as we can see here. Now it's not a simulation, it's just geometry. And what I can do is there's a node in Houdini called copy to points, which is you can take your points and some geometry, and you can take that geometry and copy it to your points. And you can see now we have our lasers. So in this flipbook, we can see what this ends up looking like. There are the bullets. You can see them coming out of the ship. So to create that, I used a smoke simulation and a particle simulation combined. To start off, I took my model, just like in the lasers. I went and grabbed my velocity, I got the polygons, and then took the back of the engines off so I could have the geometry just put points on. Or once I grabbed the geometry and put points on it, I could then set that into a particle network just like before. But instead of having these shoot off like bullets, I just have them trail behind the geometry. And you can see that here. So right here you can see the particles are trailing off, just like the contrails, and I have the same kind of motion with them too. That's what I was trying to create, because the smoke will stick to the particles. It'll have its own features to it, but mostly it'll kind of be parented almost to the particles. Once I had that, I used a pyro simulation, which is smoke, created the particles for that, added the volume rasterize, which is just creating the volume, and then put that into a pyro solver, which is the solver that makes all the smoke and the fire and the explosions. This is a lot heavier for the computer to do, but once you go into here and simulate it, you can then have your smoke trails. You first need your destruction. So what I did is I grabbed my extremely large TIE Fighter and scaled it down to where it's the correct size. Then what I could do was I could fracture it. So what that means is you'll break it into multiple different pieces. This is what the fracture looks like. So each one of these individual pieces will break. So what you want to do then is you want to add the correct amount of velocity, which the way I found to do that was just kind of animate it a little bit and give it enough force that it would break, but not too much that it would just die, just go everywhere. Then you can calculate that velocity and bring it into our constraints. So what that is just a bunch of lines telling the geometry, okay, so we're going to have a certain amount of strength. So if this part gets hit, not everything else is going to fall apart. Then you want to put that into your bullet solver, which is just rigid body or like a simple physics simulation. So what I did to make it break was I created a ball. You can see that right here. So it's just a sphere, and that sphere I set to collide with it, and when this model comes in fast speeds, it'll break. So you can see once it hits that ball, it blows up. But we're not done yet. We have a lot more to do. So what I noticed when I was watching a lot of Star Wars clips and real explosions is you have an initial explosion, and then you have trails. That initial explosion doesn't just keep going. So to create that, I had to first create the initial explosion. So I imported my destruction files, grabbed the velocity, and then found two places that I wanted the initial explosion to happen. I put points on that, or pyro source, and installized a smoke and burn. So different attributes. Or actually, then I created a pyro burst, which is just a bunch of points that'll go out, and you can see that here. There we go. So you can see it's just 1 to 2 frames where it really explodes, and there's a lot of points and it has a lot of velocity, and that'll create the explosion. Then once you do that, you can grab your volume, looks something like this, and put it into the pyro source, which the pyro source will simulate it, and you can change all the different parameters to make it dissipate the correct speed or make it look the right way. As you saw in the visual effects breakdown, compositing adds a lot. To composite, you do need to do a few things in the render. So first thing you want to do is you want to add something called multipasses, or AOVs. What that can do is allow you to make many different changes. If we go into this first shot here, we have our smoke. It's not even there in the original render. Our fog here, right? That adds a lot of detail and a lot of depth to the scene, but how do you get that smoke to look right? Well, you do something, or you add something called a Z depth pass. Now what that is it allows you to have the blacks are closer to you and the whites are farther. And depending on what you put the whites at, if it's more white, you'll have more fog, as you see here. So you have a lot of fog here, and as you push that back, you have less fog. I personally found it was best at 1250. Another thing that adds a lot is lens distortion. It makes it look a lot more realistic because it makes the camera look a lot more realistic. Because when things move, they actually distort, especially with wider lenses like this webcam. As you move to the side of things, you get a lot more distortion. The other thing that I like a lot, especially in this shot, is lens flares. So bright spots on a camera will do a few different things. One, they'll overexpose, they'll just be white, which you can see on the bullets, they're white. The other thing that they'll do is a lot of times is flare up. So you can see on this laser, we have a lens flare. Or what the specific lens flare looks like is this. It's just pretty simple. You can kind of see as it goes out of frame. And let's say the light's here, you'll see a lot of it. The light's here, you'll see a lot of it. You know, you can kind of, as the light moves, as the source moves, which is my mouse, you'll get these different flares. So adding that lens flare to the laser adds a lot. And then the other thing I added was these lights on the front of the Razor Crest. They look like this. Now turn down the brightness of them, because if it's too much, then it looks fake. You need enough, but not enough, not too much. The only shots that were different were the shots with explosions, which I had to add a little bit more glows and stuff, but it was also pretty simple. So what I did with this one is I have the explosion as a separate pass. And what I can do with that explosion is add some more reds, add some greens, and it really ties everything together and makes everything look very nice. Thank you for your time. I hope you like this project. If I were to do this project again, I would make the canyon a little bit taller, had a little bit of stars in the background, and redo my explosions. Bye.